we'll start with you because exciting news. You're part of the team covering this on the ground. What was your first take? What was your headline thoughts when you saw this squad being announced earlier this week?
Yeah, some really, really interesting names, I think, included this time, isn't it? Because we've got a lot of youngsters in the squad. I think Malki Madara and Manudinanakara deserved their call ups after their performances in New Zealand. So they come back. But you've also got Deumi Vihanga, which is interesting because she was the one who kind of really shone during that World Cup a couple of years ago, the first under 19 World Cup, but then never really got any call ups to the national side, which people were expecting. Manudi, few years younger to her, was actually the one who got in before her. So it's interesting to see them and the thinking behind it because, as we know, this is, as far as I know, the last series Sri Lanka will have before the World Cup. So
Mm.
they'll want to kind of finalize a few things. So it's interesting to see those names. Of course, you've got also like Rashmika Sewandi, who's played before. Also another young player from that under 19 squad, the first World Cup squad. But also then, if you look at the older players, I'm very surprised to see Inoka Ranavira back in the squad because you kind of got the feeling that her time was done and Sri Lanka had moved past her, but she makes it back, and so do a couple of other batters who we thought we'd seen the back of for at least a couple of series to come, right? Hasini Pereira and Hansima Karunaratne. Hasini in particular, who I think we've discussed plenty of times, has got plenty of opportunities, hasn't really made the most of it. So what is the thinking behind it? And do they make it into the actual playing 11 will be interesting to see. I'm curious to see actually how Sri Lanka go about this because looking at the squad, it looks like they want to experiment a little bit, but at the same time, it's a seven game tournament, and of those 7 games, Sri Lanka will play is four in the first round, and if they make it to the final, they play the fifth game, right? So it's not a lot of game time to really finalize things. I think in terms of batting, it's more or less confirmed who your top 6 are going to be, but it's just those couple of slots that you need to fit in. So yeah, I'm very interested to see how they go about things because if I look across the 3 squads, Sri Lanka is probably named the most kind of experimental one. um so let's see how it goes.
Dom, give or take, we're about 6 months out from this World Cup happening in India. Um, there is a lot of experimentation in this squad. Should we as fans should we be worried about that kind of? Some people say 6 months is a long time. They're going to play a lot of cricket between now and then. Some other people would say actually 6 months isn't that much. They should be knowing at least who their kind of 21, 22 players are, or sorry, 18 players are going to who might be going to the squad. Not quite as many as 21, 22, and they might be surprised how many changes are in the squad and how experimental it actually is. What's your take on it?
I don't really have a big problem with being a little bit experimental. I think there are a couple factors that shape this. So Udeshika Prabodini being injured is a huge, huge thing. And I'm imagining she was injured in the March series. So I'm imagining this is probably out of an abundance of precaution that they're making sure that she's ready because she has proven sort of with the new ball and at the death to be one of their most valuable bowlers. So, I think when you have someone like Udeshika Prabodini, who, if healthy, is definitely going to get a spot, right? You can kind of play around with that. I also think, and we've talked about this a lot, the weaknesses of Sri Lanka's side are kind of clear. They're looking for those batting all rounders. They're looking for someone to break in and take wickets. And until they kind of find those players who can make inroads, I think it's worth moving around and seeing who can do those different jobs and what combination is going to work. I also think it's okay with being experimental because South Africa and India are among sort of the top 4 teams in the world when it comes to playing ODI cricket. These are very, very good squads. And you kind of have to see what players are up to it, right? And there's not too much to lose if you have a bad series, that's, to me, kind of expected. I'm not expecting them to win 5 on the bounce and win this entire series, this entire Tri Nations tournament. But what I want to see is what players they have that can actually step up against this highest quality opposition. So in that sense, I want to see what players have that ability to raise their game to the highest level against the best opposition. And if that means shuffling a little bit, that's okay. The one downside, the one thing that I don't like is bringing back sort of these older players like a Hassani Pereira, an Inoka Ranawira, where we know what we're going to get from them, right? We can always bring them in closer to the World Cup. The players we want to see are those younger players, right? The Sachini Nisasalas, the Amesha Dulanis. One thing I'm surprised about is not giving sort of your wrist spinners, left arm wrist spinner a go, right? Sashini Gimhani, right? See how she goes against some of these oppositions. And she's someone who we all rate very highly. So I think, especially if you're looking for a wicket taker, you're looking for someone to bring that X factor. So for me, I don't have a problem with them being experimental. The bigger issue I have is going to sort of these tried and tested options instead of saying, okay, let's blood some of our younger players and give them some opportunities against this highest level of competition.
I was very surprised to see Ranavira back in the squad. I thought we'd probably seen the last of her playing for Sri Lanka. She'd had a very distinguished career. And I'm surprised that Dumi is coming in at this point as well, because it just felt like she wasn't someone who's in their plans. But I think we've got to talk about how the professional women's cricketers that are under contract at SLC actually operate, because in our minds it kind of operates a little bit like a kind of an international football side where they go off and play for their clubs, and if you get selected, if you play well, you get selected for the national side, and therefore you can come in and out of it, or you can kind of put yourself up for being selected depending on what your form is and isn't. However, with women's cricket in Sri Lanka, they're not playing enough domestic cricket for us to see how players are doing. Like, for all we know, Ranavira could have developed a new mystery ball that we like, but we've never seen it, right? That could be tearing apart opposition batters that we don't know about, right? There will be a reasoning and a theory behind why these players have come in. There is a structure. It might not be quite as well developed as we want, or as well developed as the teams that they're playing against, but there is a reasoning behind it. I kind of think from what we've seen with the rise of the Sri Lanka, or the re-emergence of the Sri Lanka women's team, was that the SLC and the people who coach the side and pick the side should be allowed the kind of space to experiment with it. And I think we kind of got to go, you guys kind of know what you're doing. We'll you've got the benefit of hindsight. We back you on this. I just wonder how much actually you really get from having another look at Ranawira when you know, probably, I'd imagine, what you know exactly what she's going to give, right, Estelle?
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, Dom's point as well, right? Because we know what she has to offer. And I mean, I don't want to take anything away from her. She was fabulous for Sri Lanka over that period of time before they kind of hit their high, they reached their potential. She was one of those players who did carry that bowling attack and was one of the pivotal, people in that team. But since then, once they did decide to move on from her and try other players, it feels like you're taking a step back, going back to someone like her, because it's not just the bowling as well, right? You have to think about, what she offers in the field, and whether you can afford to have that kind of player, that kind of liability in the field at this stage of where the game is, right? Because you have to be at the top of your game if you're going to compete. And we saw that at the World Cup last year, where Sri Lanka went in with so much of high hopes and expectations, but they simply could not compete, because you have to always be at the top of your game if you want to compete in these tournaments. Particularly, I think the format is that you will be playing every other team in the championship. So you'll be playing 7 good teams. There are no easy games here, right? And I don't know how much of the qualifiers you guys followed, but that was tight as well. Like, it could have been any 2 teams that made it through. Teams like the West Indies are not here. So there are no gimme games in this World Cup. You have to always be at the top of your game. And that's why it's I don't understand, because like we discussed already, the we know what she has to offer, and we know what Sri Lanka needs. Sri Lanka needs wicket taking options. That is where they've had trouble. They have containment options. They have bowlers who could probably bowl you 10 overs for 40 runs, but they don't have the players who can pick up wickets. And that's been one of the biggest problems for them over the last couple of years. Even when they've had success, it's because someone like Inoshi or Kavisha have managed to pick up wickets, but they've not had that consistent wicket taking option. So I'm actually surprised, like someone like Sachini Nisansala, unless she's injured, she looks a really promising prospect, right? And every opportunity she's got, she's looked good. Shashini Gimhani, I think there's still a lot of development that needs to happen with her. She's 15, there's plenty of time for that. But Nisansala definitely, I feel, has a lot to offer, not just with the ball. I think she has potential with the bat, and she's a really good fielder as well. So that's why I remember when Inoka was dropped, we were talking about why she's dropped and criticizing that decision. But having done that, to then go back to her seems a bit weird to me.
Yeah. And I think the youth of these players is something worth considering, because they're going to grow by playing, right? You can grow them into what they need to be, right? You can grow them into wicket takers. You can tell them, this is your mentality. We need to break these partnerships in the middle, and that's how we want you to bowl, right? Whereas it's harder to get someone like a Sugandhika or an Inoka Ranawira, who we know what they can do, to change it up, right? To do something different, to challenge the batters that they're facing. So I think, I don't know, I think I agree very much with Estelle that it looks like we're taking steps forward, but we're also taking steps back at the same time.
Can we talk a little bit about the actual tournament itself? Fans on social media have talked about the kind of return of the Tri-Series for ages and ages and ages. It looks like 2025 might be a return. I think there's a men's Tri-Series somewhere in the offing as well at some point this year. I can't remember where or how or who. Estelle, what do you think going into this would be a good result for Sri Lanka? Do they need to get without outright winning the tournament, do we need to just make sure we're competitive against the other 2 countries, or is anything less than the win a disaster?
No, I think you can't look at this tournament and expect Sri Lanka to be like a sure shot at winning, right? But I think given how they have performed over the last year, forget about the disappointment in the T20 World Cup. Apart from that, they've been growing, right? So I think they should be competing strongly against both teams. It's a lot closer. I wouldn't say with India, but certainly South Africa, I think it can be a lot closer than what we've seen in terms of results in the past. South Africa also very dependent on a couple of players, right? They've got, it's if I think if you look at like South Africa, Sri Lanka, West Indies, you've got that one top order batter who you expect to make all the runs for you. But South Africa have the added, Marizan Cap, who's a fabulous player, and a couple of other good players in their side. But predominantly with the batting, they're dependent on Woolward, right? So although they've had the better of Sri Lanka in terms of results, I think it's a lot closer than that would suggest. If Sri Lanka can, find players to stand up as they did in the last 18 months, in the last 2 years, then I think definitely the goal would be at least to make it to the final. You don't want to play a home tournament, and just lose every game you play, right? You want to be competitive, and I'm sure the conditions will also be favorable to Sri Lanka. What they will want, given the way they've gone about naming the squad, is to find some new players, putting their hands up. Like you had Malki Madar, I thought was very impressive in New Zealand. Manudi showed glimpses of what she can do and the confidence she has, right? So if you can get a couple of those players, and particularly that middle order all-rounder role, right? If you can get Devmi or Manudi to get some runs, that would be fantastic for Sri Lanka.
Dom, what are you thinking about what Sri Lanka should be looking to achieve during this
Yeah.
series?
So I think I kind of had three big things that I want them to do, or I'll say four. The fourth, though, is an extra. So one is I want to see Chamari return to dominant batting form, because that bodes well for Sri Lanka's chances in any tournament. When she bats well, they can beat any team in the world. We saw that with South Africa, right? Chasing down an excess
Mm.
of 300, scoring 195 runs in a chase. She's so good, and when she's in that form, I think it imbues the rest of the side with confidence that they can go out and express themselves. We've talked about how she's a talisman for the side, a lot, right? I think we can look to the Asia Cup and her consistent quality performances, how they elevated the performances of the Harshathas and the Vishmis. So then that's my second point is I want to see them get runs on the board. I think we've seen what the Indian women can do. They've scored in excess of 400 in a few one-day matches this year already. I want to see our team put up big runs. I want to see Vishmi and Harshitha show the talent that they have. I want to see one of those younger players like a Dumi um, or Manudi score some runs as well. So I want to see a more complete batting performance. I want to see everybody kind of pitching in, right? Because we've talked about this with the men's team. T20 cricket, you can get away with a sort of one batter show a little bit. But in ODI cricket, you need to build partnerships. You need to stitch things together in order to consistently reach that 250 mark, that 300 mark that you want to be sort of super competitive. So I want to see them push towards those bigger totals. The third thing is to figure out their strategies for taking wickets in the power play, particularly, because I think that's one really important thing. Can you break the back of sort of a batting side early on, and they really struggled to do that, right? So finding their way, whether that's spin early, whether that's a combination of new seamers, right, like Malki Madara, we saw do that against New Zealand. So figuring out what are the plans for us to take wickets, and then how do you use some of these kind of uh, really sort of dynamic players, someone like a Kavisha or a Chamri, who have bowling talent, right? How can you not just have them fill overs, but actually be used at kind of critical points in the game to either apply pressure or take wickets, depending on who's coming in? And then the fourth would be get a win from one of those four matches, because I think that'll do a lot of good, right? I think going 0-4 and getting bundled out of the tournament would be a big blow to sort of expectations, to ego, but getting a good win against either of those sides will do a lot for confidence and tell them that they can play at the highest level. And we saw again the impact of that confidence of we beat England, we beat New Zealand, we beat South Africa. They play with a sort of swag and energy that we haven't seen before. So that's kind of my four big hopes, and I'm hoping that they'll check all those boxes, because I think if they do that, they'll have a chance to perform well at the World Cup and see where things stand.